I stood frozen in my own foyer, my hand still on the doorknob as my son Mark's voice drifted from the living room. "She'll be dead within a week, Sarah, just like Dad." My fingers trembled against my late husband Robert's will in my purse. I'd driven halfway to the airport before remembering I'd left it behind. Now hearing my daughter-in-law's cold laugh and the words, "The morphine in her tea is already working," I realized my forgotten document had just saved my life. The morning had started like any other since Robert's passing 3 months ago. I'd awakened in our king-sized bed, still reaching for his side, still expecting to feel his warmth. At 68, after 45 years of marriage, some habits die harder than grief itself. My son Mark had called early as he did every morning now. "Morning, Mom. Sarah and I will stop by this evening with your tea. Don't forget to take your medications." "Thank you, sweetheart," I'd replied, grateful for their care. At 42, Mark had stepped up beautifully since his father's death. His wife Sarah, 38, and always impeccably dressed, had been equally attentive. They'd moved back from Denver to help me through this difficult time, taking leave from their jobs to ensure I wasn't alone. Robert had been a successful real estate developer building shopping centers across California. We'd lived comfortably, though. I'd never paid much attention to the business side of things. That was Robert's domain. Mine was our home, our family, our life together. I'd spent the morning packing for my trip to Seattle. My sister Gloria had been begging me to visit, insisting that a change of scenery would help with my grief. "Lizzie, you need to get out of that house," she'd said during our last phone call. "It's too full of memories." She was right, of course. Everything reminded me of Robert. His reading glasses still sat on his nightstand. His coffee mug waited by the machine. His scent lingered in his closet where his suits hung like patient soldiers. I'd pulled my suitcase from the closet and begun folding clothes when I realized I couldn't find my passport. It was always in the top drawer of my dresser, tucked beside Robert's in a leather folder he'd bought us for our 20th anniversary, but the drawer contained only his. Frustrated, I'd searched through every drawer, every shelf, every possible hiding place. Nothing. When Sarah arrived for lunch, bringing her homemade soup, I mentioned my dilemma. "Oh, I think I saw it in Robert's study," she said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "You know, when we were organizing his papers last week, it might have gotten mixed up with some documents." I thanked her and headed to Robert's study after she left. The room still smelled like his cologne and the leather of his favorite chair. I found my passport quickly enough sitting on a shelf between 2 accounting ledgers. But as I reached for it, a folder slipped from behind the books and scattered papers across the floor. Kneeling to gather them, my heart stopped. They were medical forms, psychiatric evaluation documents with my name printed at the top. The date was recent, just 2 weeks ago, but I'd never seen any psychiatrist. The forms were partially completed in careful handwriting I recognized immediately. Sarah's distinctive loops and curves filled the spaces, describing symptoms I'd never experienced. "Patient shows increasing confusion," one line read. "Unable to remember recent conversations. Frequently disoriented." My hands shook as I read further. "Recommendation for immediate intervention. Family reports finding patient wandering neighborhood in nightgown." Complete fabrication. I'd never wandered anywhere. I wasn't confused. I remembered every conversation perfectly. I heard footsteps in the hallway and quickly shoved the papers back behind the books, grabbing my passport. Mark appeared in the doorway, his face creasing with concern. Mom, Sarah said you were looking for something." "Just my passport," I said, holding it up with a smile that felt like broken glass. "Silly me forgetting where I put things." He relaxed, coming over to kiss my forehead. "It happens to all of us. Dad used to lose his keys 3 times a week, remember?" I laughed, the sound hollow in my chest. "That he did. I'll bring your evening tea early tonight, he said. Sarah's making that special blend you love. It's been helping you sleep, hasn't it? Like a baby. I lied, thinking of the chamomile tea they'd been bringing religiously every night since Robert's funeral. I'd thought it was kindness. Now those forms fresh in my mind, I wondered what else it might be. That evening, Mark arrived at precisely 6 o'clock, carrying the delicate china cup on a tray like a butler. The tea steamed gently, its honey gold color catching the light. Here you go, Mom. Sarah added extra honey tonight, just how you like it. I took the cup with steady hands, years of hosting dinner parties serving me well. She's so thoughtful. You married a treasure, Mark. He watched as I lifted the cup to my lips, and for the first time I noticed how intently he studied my face. I took a small sip, then another, praising the flavor, while my mind cataloged the strange, slightly bitter aftertaste I'd been attributing to a new brand of honey. It's delicious, I said, setting the cup on the side table. I'll finish it while I read. But he didn't leave. He sat across from me, making small talk about the weather, about their jobs, about anything except why he was watching me like a hawk eyeing a mouse. I pretended to sit between responses, tilting the cup to my lips without drinking, occasionally making satisfied sounds. Finally, he stood. I should get back. Sarah's making dinner. You'll be okay alone. Of course, dear. I'm just going to read and go to bed early. Travel tomorrow, you know. After his car pulled away, I carried the tea to the bathroom and poured it down the sink, watching the golden liquid swirl away. Then I went to Robert's study and retrieved those forms, photographing each page with my phone before replacing them exactly as I'd found them. Later in bed, I realized something that chilled me more than those false medical forms. For the first time in weeks, my mind felt clear. The fog I'd attributed to grief was lifting, and with its departure came a terrible understanding. I wasn't imagining the bitter taste in the tea. I wasn't paranoid about those forms, and I definitely wasn't confused about my son's intentions. My fingers found Robert's pillow beside me, clutching it like a life preserver in a storm. Oh, Robert, I whispered to the darkness. What has our son become? Sleep eluded me that night, but not because of grief. I lay awake planning, thinking, remembering every strange moment since the funeral. The way Sarah had insisted on handling my medications, how Mark had suggested I sign papers without reading them, just routine stuff, Mom. The dizzy spells that only came after evening tea. By dawn, I'd made my decision. I would go to Seattle as planned, but first I needed to know exactly what my son and his wife were planning. The forms were just the beginning. There had to be more. I thought of Robert's will in my purse, the one Mark had been so eager to see, so insistent I bring to the lawyer. But Robert had always taught me to keep copies of important documents. His real will, I suddenly remembered, was in his gun safe. The one in my purse was just a copy. Or was it? As the sun painted the sky pink and gold, I rose and dressed quietly. I had a plane to catch, a sister to visit, and now a mystery to solve. My son thought I was a feeble old woman lost in grief and confusion. He was about to learn that Lizzie Coleman might be 68 and widowed, but she was far from finished. Robert hadn't married a fool, and I wouldn't let our son make me into one. I packed my suitcase with steady hands, including the photographed medical forms tucked into a hidden pocket. Whatever game Mark and Sarah were playing, they'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'd spent 45 years married to one of the shrewdest businessmen in California. Robert had taught me more than they knew, and now it was time to use those lessons. The morning sun climbed higher as I wheeled my suitcase to the door, my mind clearer than it had been in weeks. 3 months of grief had nearly broken me, but this betrayal had forged something new in its place. Determination. The next few days became an elaborate performance. I perfected the art of appearing drowsy and confused whenever Mark and Sarah visited, while secretly documenting everything in a journal I hid inside an old cookbook Robert had bought me but I'd never used. The joy of French pastries seemed an unlikely place for anyone to search. Each evening, I'd accept the tea, gratefully take small sips while they watched, then dispose of it the moment they left. The difference in how I felt was remarkable. Without the nightly dose of whatever they were giving me, my energy returned, my thoughts sharpened, and most importantly, my suspicions crystallized into certainty. I developed excuses for the tea disposal. One night, I accidentally knocked over the cup after they left. Another time, I poured it into the large fern by the window, watching over the next days as its leaves began to yellow and droop. If it was killing my plant, what had it been doing to me? On the fourth day of my secret rebellion, I was pretending to nap in the living room when I heard Sarah's voice from the kitchen. She must have thought I was deeply asleep, drugged by their special brew. "Dr. Garrett says we need to accelerate the timeline," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the doorway. "The morphine isn't working fast enough. She's supposed to be deteriorating, not stabilizing." My blood turned to ice. Morphine. They were drugging me with morphine. "I don't like this," Mark's voice responded, but it was weak, uncertain. "She's my mother, Sarah. Maybe we should just wait." "Wait for what?" Sarah's tone turned sharp. "For her to spend your inheritance on some charity she's already talking about donating to that literacy foundation Robert supported. Do you want to work for the rest of your life while your mother sits on $10 million? $10 million. I knew Robert had been successful, but I'd never concerned myself with exact numbers. That had been his department, just as keeping our home and raising Mark had been mine. "The facility is perfect," Sarah continued. "Sunset Gardens specializes in patients with dementia. Once she's there, we'll have full control. Dr. Garrett has already agreed to declare her incompetent. Your signatures as next of kin combined with his medical opinion will be enough." "But what if someone investigates? What if Aunt Gloria?" "Gloria hasn't visited in 2 years. She'll believe whatever we tell her. Your mother's grief-stricken, confused, wandering the neighborhood at night. We're doing this out of love and concern for her safety." Sarah's laugh was like breaking glass. "Besides, once she's declared incompetent, her testimony won't mean anything even if she tries to speak up." I heard footsteps approaching and quickly deepened my breathing, letting my mouth fall slightly open in feigned sleep. Through barely cracked eyelids, I watched Sarah enter the room and stand over me, studying my face with cold calculation. "Look at her," she said softly as Mark joined her. "Pathetic. All that money wasted on someone who probably won't even remember having it in a few months." Mark shifted uncomfortably. "The doctor said the morphine could cause permanent damage if we keep increasing the dose." "Then we'd better move quickly, hadn't we?" Sarah reached down and adjusted the Afghan over my legs with fake tenderness. "I've already called Sunset Gardens. They have an opening next week." After they left, I waited a full 20 minutes before moving. Then I grabbed my phone and searched for Sunset Gardens. The results made my stomach turn. 3 lawsuits in 5 years for patient abuse, mysterious deaths, families complaining about missing belongings and unexplained injuries. This wasn't just about money. They were planning to warehouse me in a nightmare while they plundered everything Robert and I had built together. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Robert. Had his death really been natural? He'd been diagnosed with a heart condition, yes, but he'd been managing it well with medication. The doctors had been optimistic. Then suddenly he was gone. I remembered how Sarah had insisted on making his tea those last few weeks, the same chamomile blend she now brought me. How Mark had been the one to find him already cold in his study. How quickly they'd pushed for cremation, citing Robert's supposed wishes, though he'd never mentioned such a preference to me. My hands shook as I wrote in my journal, documenting every detail I could remember about Robert's final days. The more I wrote, the more patterns emerged. His increased fatigue, his confusion about medications, The way he'd complained about the bitter taste in his tea but drank it anyway because Sarah had been so kind to make it. Dear God, they'd killed him. They'd killed my Robert. I barely made it to the bathroom before being violently sick. 45 years of love, of building a life together, of raising the son who had apparently murdered him for money. When I finally stopped retching, I sat on the cold tile floor and made myself a promise. Robert deserved justice. I deserved the truth, and Mark and Sarah deserved whatever hell I could rain down upon them. The next morning, I knew I needed help. But who could I trust? Mark had been intercepting my mail. I'd noticed gaps in my usual correspondence. My phone calls were probably monitored too. He'd insisted on adding himself to my cell phone plan to help manage the bills. Then I remembered Robert's gun safe. He'd installed it himself, paranoid about contractors knowing the combination. Only he and I knew the code, our anniversary date, backward. Mark had asked about it after the funeral, but I'd played confused, claiming I'd never known the combination. I waited until I knew Mark was at work and Sarah at her yoga class. Then I went to Robert's study and moved the heavy painting that concealed the safe. My fingers trembled as I entered the code. The safe opened with a soft click. Inside, along with Robert's service weapon from his brief stint as a reserve deputy, I found several documents. The real will was there as I'd suspected. But there was more. Much more. A letter in Robert's handwriting dated just a week before his death. My dearest Lizzie, if you're reading this, then my suspicions were correct. I've noticed troubling changes in Mark these past months. His debts, which he thinks I don't know about, have reached dangerous levels. Sarah's influence over him grows stronger by the day, and I fear what they might do when they realize I won't bail them out again. I've changed my will to protect you. Mark will receive a modest trust fund enough to live on if he's prudent, but not enough to feed his gambling addiction or Sarah's appetites. Everything else goes to you with instructions for charitable distributions I know you'll honor. If anything happens to me, if my death seems sudden despite my stable condition, promise me you'll investigate. Trust no one except James Morrison, my lawyer. His contact information is below. I love you more than words can say. Be strong, my darling. Be smart. And above all, be careful. Forever yours, Robert. I sank into his chair, the letter clutched to my chest. He'd known. He'd tried to protect me even while facing his own danger, and I'd been too blind, too trusting, too naive to see what was happening right in front of me. But not anymore. I photographed everything in the safe, then carefully replaced each item exactly as I'd found it. Mark and Sarah thought they were dealing with a grief-addled old woman. They were about to discover that hell hath no fury like a widow scorned. That evening, when they brought my tea, I gave the performance of my life. I stumbled over my words, forgot Sarah's name twice, and stared vacantly at the television while it was off. I watched Mark and Sarah exchange satisfied glances. Mom, Mark said gently, kneeling beside my chair. Sarah and I have been thinking. Maybe you shouldn't be alone so much. There are places where you could have constant care people to make sure you take your medications. I blinked at him, slowly letting my eyes go unfocused. That's nice, dear. Will Robert be there? Sarah barely suppressed a smile. No, Lizzie. Remember Robert passed away? I let my face crumble in confusion and grief. Oh yes. Sometimes I forget. I reached for the tea with shaking hands. This helps me remember. The tea helps. They left looking triumphant. I waited until their taillights disappeared, then poured the tea down the sink and began to plan. They wanted to accelerate their timeline. Fine. I'd accelerate mine too. But first I needed allies, and I knew exactly where to start. My nephew Paul Coleman was a detective with the San Diego Police Department. We'd been estranged for years after a family fight over his father's estate, but desperate times called for desperate measures. I found his number in an old address book and dialed before I could lose my nerve.
Aunt Lizzie.
His voice was shocked, but not unfriendly.
Is everything okay?
No, Paul, I said quietly. Nothing is okay. I need your help, and I think you're the only one I can trust. There was a long pause, then, tell me everything. So I did. Every detail, every suspicion, every piece of evidence. When I finished, Paul was silent for so long I thought he'd hung up.
Jesus Christ,
he finally breathed.
Aunt Lizzie, you need to get out of that house.
I can't. If I run, they'll know I'm onto them. They'll destroy evidence, cover their tracks.
Then we do this smart,
he said, his cop instincts taking over. Document everything. Don't drink anything they give you. And for God's sake, don't sign anything. I'll open a quiet investigation, but I need more proof before I can move officially. I'll get it, I promised. Whatever it takes. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's study, surrounded by the ghosts of our life together. The man I'd loved was gone, murdered by our own son. The child I'd raised, nursed through fevers, cheered at Little League games, had become a monster. But I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. Mark and Sarah had made one crucial error in their perfect plan. They'd underestimated me, just like everyone always had. Sweet Lizzie. Gentle Lizzie. Proper hostess, devoted wife, loving mother Lizzie. They were about to meet a different Lizzie, one forged in grief and betrayal, one who'd learned from the best businessman in California, one who had nothing left to lose and everything to avenge. The game was on. 3 days later, my performance as a deteriorating widow had been so convincing that Mark announced they'd arranged for a doctor to make a house call.
Just to check on you, Mom,
he said, patting my hand like I was a child.
Dr. Garrett is wonderful with patients in your situation.
I knew that name. Dr. Garrett was the one Sarah had been discussing on the phone, the one who'd already agreed to declare me incompetent. Now he was coming to my home to make it official. That morning I prepared carefully. I'd been a theater major in college before I met Robert, before marriage and motherhood became my world. Those old skills would serve me now. I practiced in the mirror, letting my face go slack, my eyes unfocused. I shuffled instead of walked, repeated questions, and perfected the art of looking lost in my own home. When Dr. Garrett arrived at 2 o'clock sharp, Mark and Sarah flanked him like eager students. The doctor was younger than I'd expected, perhaps early 40s, with nervous eyes and hands that shook slightly as he unpacked his medical bag. This wasn't a man comfortable with what he was doing.
Mrs. Coleman,
he said too loudly as if I were deaf, as well as supposedly demented.
I'm Dr. Garrett. Your son asked me to check on you.
I tilted my head, squinting at him. Are you here about the roses? Robert says the roses need pruning, but I can't find the garden shears. I caught Sarah's smirk before she covered it with concern. There are no roses here, Lizzie. Remember, we live in California now, not your childhood home in Ohio. Oh. I let confusion wash over my features. But I smell them sometimes, especially at night. Dr. Garrett began his examination, checking my blood pressure, listening to my heart, shining lights in my eyes. All standard. Then came the cognitive tests.
Mrs. Coleman, can you tell me what year it is?
I hesitated, chewing my lip.
It's Robert and I just got married, so it must be 1979.
Mark's hand tightened on Sarah's shoulder. Dr. Garrett made a note.
And who is the current president?
Carter. No, wait. I frowned deeply. Reagan? Ronald Reagan. I voted for him. More notes. More questions. I failed just enough to seem impaired, but not completely gone. Too much deterioration too fast might raise suspicions. I needed to appear as a woman sliding gradually into darkness, not plummeting off a cliff. The doctor asked me to remember 3 words: apple penny table. 5 minutes later, when he asked me to recall them, I confidently said, orange nickel chair. Close but wrong. Believable but sad. Through it all, I watched him make notes I wasn't supposed to see. His handwriting was cramped but legible. Patient shows clear signs of moderate dementia with rapid progression. Confusion regarding time and place. Unable to retain new information. Recommend immediate placement in managed care facility for patient safety.
I think that's enough for today,
Dr. Garrett said, packing his instruments.
Mrs. Coleman needs rest.
I'll make tea, I announced, suddenly standing with surprising energy. Robert loves my tea. I use his mother's china.
That's okay, Mom,
Mark said quickly.
Why don't you sit down? Sarah will make tea.
But I'm the hostess, I insisted, then looked around confused. Aren't I? Is this my house? The look that passed between the 3 of them was pure satisfaction. I'd given them exactly what they wanted, a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life, let alone her fortune. After showing the doctor out, Mark returned to find me staring at a family photo tracing Robert's face with one finger. He's late for dinner again, I said sadly. Always working, that man.
Mom.
Mark sat beside me, and for just a moment I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt. Regret. But then Sarah entered the room, and his expression hardened.
We need to talk about your future.
My future? I blinked at him. But I'm 68 years old. How much future can I have? That's exactly why we want to make sure you're cared for, Sarah said, sitting on my other side, boxing me in. There's a lovely place called Sunset Gardens. You'd have your own room nurses to help with medication activities with other residents. Would Robert visit? I asked hopefully. Mark's voice was gentle but firm. We'll visit every week. Won't we, Sarah? Of course, she lied smoothly. Every single week. After they left, I maintained my confused act for another hour in case they were watching somehow. Then I retreated to Robert's study and called Paul. I need you to run a check on Dr. Garrett, I said without preamble. Something's off about him.
Already on it,
Paul replied.
Aunt Lizzie, this guy's dirty.
3 malpractice settlements, all involving elderly patients declared incompetent who later died under mysterious circumstances. He's one signature away from losing his license. Which makes him desperate enough to work with Mark and Sarah? Exactly. But here's the interesting part. I pulled his financial records. Large cash deposits starting 2 months ago, right around the time Uncle Robert got sick. My heart hammered. They were planning this even before Robert died. Looks like it. I also found something else. Sarah's been married before, twice. Both husbands died within 2 years of marriage. Both left her everything. I sank into Robert's chair, the weight of this revelation crushing. She's a black widow, and Mark brought her right into our home. I've got enough to start building a case, but I need more. Can you get access to their phones or computers? I'll try. They're bringing dinner tomorrow night. Be careful, Paul warned. If they suspect you're onto them.
They'll accelerate the timeline. I know. But I can't let them get away with this, Paul. Not with Robert's murder.
You won't. I promise you that. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Dr. Garrett's shaking hands, his nervous eyes. He knew what he was doing was wrong, but desperation had driven him to it. Just like Mark. My son, my baby boy, had let greed and a manipulative woman turn him into a patricide. The next evening, opportunity presented itself in an unexpected way. Sarah had brought her laptop to show me virtual tours of Sunset Gardens, painting a picture of a luxury retreat rather than the nightmare I'd researched. While she was in the bathroom and Mark was getting their coats, I noticed she'd left it open and unlocked. My heart pounding, I quickly navigated to her email. What I found there made my blood freeze. An exchange with someone named Patricia Williams, dated 3 weeks before Robert's death. Sarah, I warned you after Tom died that I'd be watching. My son's death was no accident, and we both know it. That morphine overdose was not self-administered. Stay away from elderly men, or I'll make sure the authorities know about Phoenix and Vegas, too. Patricia. Sarah's response. Mind your own business, old woman. Your son was weak. Natural selection at work. Besides, no one believed you then. They won't believe you now. Phoenix and Vegas. 2 more victims. How many had there been? I heard the bathroom door open and quickly clicked back to the virtual tour slideshow. Sarah returned, smiling her perfect smile, oblivious to what I'd just discovered. Isn't it lovely, Lizzie? Look at the garden area. You could sit there and feed the birds. Birds, I repeated dreamily. Robert bought me a canary once. It sang so beautifully. What happened to it? It died, Mom, Mark said quietly. 20 years ago. Oh, I let tears well up. Everything dies, doesn't it? Robert, the canary, the roses. I looked directly at Sarah. Everything I love dies. Something flickered in her eyes. For just a second, I saw the predator beneath the perfect daughter-in-law mask. She knew that I knew, or at least suspected. That's why Sunset Gardens will be perfect, she said, her voice harder now. Professional care to make sure nothing bad happens to you. After they left, I forwarded the emails to my own account, then to Paul. The evidence was mounting, but would it be enough? And more importantly, would we have time to use it before they shipped me off to Sunset Gardens? I walked through my home that night, touching familiar objects, remembering better times. The crystal vase Robert bought in Venice. The piano where Mark learned to play chopsticks. The kitchen where I'd cooked thousands of meals for my family, never knowing I was feeding a future killer. In the living room, I found the fern I'd been poisoning with their tea. It was dead now, leaves black and curled. I stared at it for a long moment, then made my decision. If they wanted to play with poison, I'd give them a dose of their own medicine. Not literally. I wasn't a killer like them. But there were other ways to poison a plan, other methods of watching something toxic wither and die. Tomorrow they planned to have me sign papers. Probably power of attorney, maybe even commitment forms. They thought I'd be confused enough to sign anything they put in front of me. They thought wrong. I might be playing a broken woman, but underneath I was steel. Robert Steele, forged in 45 years of love and sharpened by betrayal. Tomorrow the real game would begin. I watered the dead fern out of habit, whispering to it like an old friend. Don't worry. Justice is coming. For you. For Robert. For all of us they've destroyed. The plant, of course, didn't answer. But somewhere in the darkness outside, I heard a siren wailing. The sound of authority, of law, of hope. Soon, I promised myself. Very soon. The next morning brought a phone call that changed everything. Paul's voice was tight with urgency. Aunt Lizzie, I've been digging deeper into Sarah's past. You need to hear this. Her first husband in Phoenix died of a morphine overdose. Ruled accidental. Her second in Vegas had a heart attack after drinking tea she'd made him. Sound familiar? My knees went weak, just like Robert. There's more. I found Patricia Williams, the woman from the email. She's been tracking Sarah for 3 years, building her own evidence file. She's willing to testify, but here's the kicker: Dr. Garrett was involved in Vegas too. He signed the death certificate. They're a team, I breathed. Sarah finds the victims, Garrett provides medical cover. I've got enough to bring them in, but it's still largely circumstantial. We need a confession or caught in the act evidence. Can you hold out a little longer? They want me to sign papers today. Power of attorney, I think. Stall. Confuse them. Do whatever you have to do, but don't sign anything. I'm working with the DA now. We're so close. After Paul hung up, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the space where Robert used to read his morning paper. 3 husbands, 3 murders. And my Robert was just another victim in Sarah's bloody ledger. But Mark? How did my son become part of this? Was it just greed, or had Sarah manipulated him too? I thought of him as a little boy bringing me dandelions he'd picked so proud of his flowers for mommy. When had that sweet child become a man who could murder his father? A knock at the door interrupted my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize, elderly, well-dressed with eyes that held the same grief I saw in my mirror.
Mrs. Coleman, I'm Patricia Williams. I believe you know my former daughter-in-law.
I opened the door cautiously. How did you find me?
I've been watching Sarah for years. When I saw the obituary for Robert Coleman's successful real estate developer with a son named Mark,
I knew she'd struck again. I'm so very sorry for your loss. I invited her in and over coffee that I made myself. Patricia told me her story. Her son Tom had been a successful surgeon, divorced lonely. Enter Sarah, young and beautiful and so very attentive. Within 6 months they were married. Within 2 years he was dead. The morphine levels in his blood were consistent with hospice care, Patricia said bitterly.
Except Tom wasn't in hospice. He'd had minor surgery, nothing life-threatening, but Dr. Garrett signed off that Tom had been terminal. By the time I started asking questions, Sarah had cremated him and disappeared with $2 million.
She had Robert cremated too, I said quietly. So quickly. She said it was what he wanted, but Robert never mentioned it to me. Patricia reached across the table and took my hand. They count on our grief making us compliant. Too heartbroken to ask questions, too confused to investigate.
But you're fighting back. Good for you. My nephew is a detective. He's building a case.
I'll give him everything I have. 3 years of documentation, photos of Sarah with different names, records of Garrett's involvement. Patricia's eyes hardened.
I couldn't save my son, but maybe we can save you and get justice for all of them.
We spent the next hour planning. Patricia would deliver her evidence to Paul while I continued my performance. She gave me her phone number, making me promise to call if things escalated. Sarah's dangerous when cornered, she warned. And if your son is anything like mine was, he's completely under her spell. Don't trust him no matter what maternal feelings you have. Tom would have done anything for her, including hurting me if she'd asked. After Patricia left, I prepared for the evening's performance. I dressed in mismatched clothes, put my jewelry on wrong, and practiced my vacant stare. When Mark and Sarah arrived with their briefcase of papers, I was ready. Mom, you're wearing 2 different shoes. Mark noted genuine concern flickering across his face. I looked down confused. They're both black. Aren't they supposed to match? Sarah suppressed a smile and opened the briefcase. Lizzie, we have some important papers for you to sign. Just routine things to help Mark manage your affairs while you're adjusting. I picked up the pen, then set it down, picked it up again. I need my reading glasses. You're wearing them, Mark pointed out gently. I touched my face, surprised. Oh, but these aren't right. I need the other ones, the ones Robert gave me for Christmas. I stood up, then sat down. Where did I put them? This went on for 20 minutes. Every time they got me close to signing, I'd remember something else I needed. Different glasses, a glass of water, to use the bathroom, to check if the stove was off. My confusion was maddening but believable. Finally, Sarah's patience cracked. Just sign the papers, Lizzie. You don't need to read them. Mark will take care of everything. But Robert always said to read everything before signing. I looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. Didn't he? Sarah. Or was that my father? I get confused. Mark rubbed his forehead, frustrated. Maybe we should do this tomorrow when she's more lucid. We don't have time, Sarah hissed, then caught herself. I mean, the sooner we get these filed, the sooner we can help your mother. I started humming then an old lullaby I used to sing to Mark. He went very still, something flickering in his eyes. Memory guilt. But Sarah touched his arm, and the moment passed.
"Let's take the papers with us," he said quietly. "We'll try again tomorrow."
After they left, I found I was shaking. Not from fear, but from rage. That woman, that murderer, sitting in my home trying to steal what Robert and I had built while his ashes were barely cold. And Mark, my son, letting her. I called Paul immediately. "Patricia Williams came by. She has evidence." "I know. She just left the station." "Lizzie, this is huge. With her documentation, we can establish a pattern. The DA is ready to move, but we need just a little more. Something current, something that proves intent with you specifically." "What if I could get them to confess on tape?" "That would do it, but it's dangerous. These are desperate people."
"They're also arrogant. They think I'm a helpless old woman."
I looked at Robert's portrait on the mantel. "I've got an idea, but I'll need help with the technical side." "Whatever you need." I outlined my plan. Paul was quiet for a moment, then said,
"It could work. But if they realize what you're doing, then I'll be no worse off than I am now. They're already planning to lock me away and steal everything. At least this way I'm fighting back."
"Uncle Robert would be proud of you," Paul said softly. "I hope so," I whispered. "I really hope so." That night I sat in Robert's study reading his final letter again. His warning about Mark's gambling debts made more sense now. Sarah must have found a desperate man and molded him into her weapon. My poor weak son destroyed by his own greed, and a woman who collected husbands like trophies. But understanding didn't mean forgiveness. Mark had made his choice. He'd chosen money over morality, Sarah, over his family greed over love. Now he'd face the consequences. I thought about Patricia Williams carrying her grief and determination for 3 years. How many other women were out there wondering about their loved ones' sudden deaths? How many families had Sarah and Dr. Garrett destroyed? Tomorrow I'd spring my trap. One way or another, this would end. Either I'd get the evidence to put them away or, well, I didn't want to think about the alternative. I stood and walked to the window, looking out at the garden Robert had loved. The roses were blooming red as blood, beautiful as justice. He'd planted them for our 40th anniversary, one bush for each decade together. "I'm going to get them, my love," I whispered to the night. "For you, for Patricia's son, for all of them. I promise." Somewhere in the darkness, a nightbird sang its melody haunting and sweet, like a ghost, like a promise, like a battle cry for the living and the dead. Tomorrow everything would change. The next evening, I made the call that would change everything. My hands were steady as I dialed Mark's number. My voice carefully calibrated to sound both lucid and urgent. "Mark, dear, I need you and Sarah to come over right away. I've had what they call a moment of clarity, and I want to sign those papers while I'm still myself."
"Mom."
His voice was shocked. "You sound different." "I know I've been confused lately," I said, allowing a tremor to creep in. "But right now, everything is clear. I understand what's been happening to me, and I want to make arrangements while I can. Please, before I slip away again." Within 20 minutes, they were at my door. I'd prepared carefully. Hidden cameras borrowed from Paul were positioned throughout Robert's workshop, the one place in the house they'd never been interested in. The heavy-duty recorder in my pocket was voice-activated, its red light hidden by my cardigan.
"Mom,"
Mark said as he entered, studying my face, "you really do seem better tonight." "It happens sometimes with dementia," Sarah said smoothly, always ready with medical knowledge she shouldn't have. Brief periods of clarity before the final decline. I nodded sadly. "That's what I've read. That's why we need to act now. But first I want to show you something in Robert's workshop. He left something there for Mark, and I keep forgetting to give it to you." They exchanged glances. Greed won over suspicion. The workshop still smelled like sawdust and motor oil. Robert's sanctuary where he'd built furniture and tinkered with engines. I'd placed an envelope on the workbench visible from the doorway.
"Is that it?"
Mark asked, reaching for it. "Wait," I said, closing the heavy door behind us. The lock clicked automatically just as Robert had designed it. "There's something else first, something I need to say." Sarah's eyes narrowed. "Lizzie, what's going on?" I dropped the confused act, entirely straightening my spine and meeting their eyes with 45 years of suppressed fury. "What's going on, Sarah, is that I know everything. The morphine in my tea, the fake medical forms, the plan to lock me in Sunset Gardens. And most importantly," I stepped closer, my voice dropping to steel, "I know you murdered my husband." Mark went white. "Mom, you're confused again. Dad had a heart attack. Induced by morphine, just like Sarah's first two husbands. Oh yes, I know about Phoenix and Vegas too. Patricia Williams sends her regards, by the way. She's been quite helpful." Sarah lunged for the door, but it wouldn't budge. Robert had built this workshop like a fortress after a break-in years ago. The only way out was the key in my pocket. "You crazy bitch!" Sarah snarled, her mask finally slipping completely. "Open this door right now!" "Not until we have a little chat about murder fraud and elder abuse." I pulled out a photo of Robert and held it up. "This man loved you, Mark. Raised you, provided for you, forgave your gambling debts 3 times, and you killed him for money." "I didn't know," Mark shouted, turning on Sarah. "You said the tea would just make him sleep better. You never said—" "Shut up, you idiot," Sarah snapped. "She's recording this." "Oh, I'm doing more than that." I gestured to the cameras. "Smile, you're on candid camera. Several of them, actually. All streaming directly to my nephew's computer at the police station." Sarah pulled out a gun from her purse. Of course she had one. A woman who'd killed 3 husbands would always have a backup plan. "Give me the key, Lizzie. Now. Or what, you'll shoot me. Go ahead. Add murder in the 1st degree to your charges. I'm sure the cameras will capture it beautifully." "Mom, please," Mark begged. "This has gone too far. Just let us out and we'll leave. We'll disappear. You'll never see us again. Like Patricia Williams never saw her son again, like I'll never see Robert again." I shook my head. "You made your choice, Mark. You chose her and money over family." Sarah kept the gun trained on me but spoke to Mark. "She has to have the key on her. Get it." "I'm not touching my mother," Mark said, backing away from both of us. "You pathetic mama's boy," Sarah sneered. "You were happy enough to poison her tea every night. Don't pretend you have morals now. You said it was just sedatives to keep her manageable." Mark was crying now, the reality of his actions crashing down. "You said once she was in the home we'd make sure she was comfortable. You never said we were killing her." "Your father figured it out," Sarah said coldly. "That's why he had to go first. He was going to change his will, cut us out completely. I couldn't let that happen. Not after everything I'd done to get you out of debt." "So you murdered him." My voice was steady despite the gun pointing at my chest. "How long had you been planning it since you met Mark? Was my son ever anything more than your next target's entrance fee?" Sarah laughed an ugly sound. "You want the truth, fine. Your precious son came to me. He knew about my history, found out through his gambling connections. He thought he was so clever, suggesting we help his father's heart condition along. I just refined the plan." I looked at Mark, my heart shattering completely. "You knew. You sought her out specifically to kill your father." Mark's face crumpled. "I owed $300,000. They were going to kill me. I just thought, if Dad died naturally, his heart was bad anyway. I didn't think about you, Mom. I swear I didn't want to hurt you. But when she suggested it, you went along." I forced myself to stay calm to keep them talking. "Every night bringing me tea, watching me drink poison." "The morphine wasn't supposed to kill you," Mark insisted. "Just make you seem confused so we could get power of attorney."
Sarah said once we had control of the money, we'd reduce the doses, let you live comfortably somewhere nice. Sarah rolled her eyes. God, you're naive. Why would we keep her alive once we had access to everything, another mouth to feed, another risk of someone figuring it out? Your mother was always going to die, Mark, just like your father. Just like all of them. All of them, I pressed. How many, Sarah? How many husbands have you buried? Tom Williams was number 3, she said proudly. Before him, there was Jeffrey in Chicago and Martin in Dallas. Your Robert made 5. Each one easier than the last. Men are so trusting when you're young and beautiful and eager to please. A little morphine in their nighttime tea slowly increasing the dose, and their hearts just can't take it. Natural causes every time. Except this time, I said. This time you got caught. By a senile old woman playing dress-up. Sarah laughed. I don't think so. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to give me that key. We're going to walk out of here. And tomorrow, you're going to be found dead from an overdose of your own medications. Confused old lady took too many pills. Tragic, but not unexpected. Except for the cameras, I reminded her. Which I'll destroy before the police arrive. Mark will confirm he found you dead. Won't you, baby? Mark was sobbing now, collapsed on the floor. I can't do this anymore. Mom, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I reached into my pocket slowly. You want the key here? But instead of a key, I pulled out Robert's service weapon from where I'd hidden it in my cardigan. 20 years of marriage to a reserve deputy had taught me more than just how to host dinner parties. Drop the gun, Sarah. Her eyes widened. You wouldn't. You're not a killer. No, I'm not. But I am a mother protecting herself and seeking justice for her murdered husband. I'll shoot if I have to. The cameras will show self-defense. We stood frozen, 2 women with guns, one motivated by greed, the other by grief and justice. Then Mark made his choice. He lunged at Sarah from the floor, grabbing for her weapon. The gun went off, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Mark screamed, clutching his shoulder as blood seeped between his fingers. Sarah turned the gun on him, her face contorted with rage. You stupid, worthless! I didn't let her finish. I pulled my trigger, aiming for her gun hand. Robert had taught me well. The bullet struck her wrist, sending her weapon flying across the room. She screamed, clutching her bleeding hand. The workshop door burst open. Paul and a team of officers flooded in, weapons drawn. They'd been waiting outside the whole time, the locked door no match for police battering rams when gunshots were heard. Nobody move, Paul commanded. Aunt Lizzie put the weapon down slowly. I complied, relief washing over me as officers secured Sarah and called for paramedics for Mark. Did you get it all? I asked Paul quietly as Sarah was led away, screaming about lawyers and setups. Every word he confirmed. Multiple confessions to murder, attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse. She's going away for life. I looked at Mark being loaded onto a stretcher, his face pale with shock and pain. Our eyes met for a moment. I saw my little boy in there, buried under years of bad choices and greed, but still there. I'm sorry, Mom, he whispered. I'm so sorry. I know, I said, not offering forgiveness I didn't feel yet. Maybe someday, but not today. Tell them everything, Mark. It's the only way to even begin making this right. As the sirens faded and the workshop emptied, I stood alone in Robert's sanctuary. The smell of gunpowder mixed with sawdust, violence tainting this peaceful place. But we'd won. Robert would have justice. All of Sarah's victims would have justice. I picked up the photo of Robert I'd brought, touching his face gently. We got them, my love. We got them. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky red and gold. A new chapter was beginning, one without Robert, but also without the shadows that had killed him. It wasn't the golden years we'd planned, but it was freedom. It was justice. It was enough. The next few weeks passed in a whirlwind of legal proceedings, investigations, and revelations that shocked even the seasoned detectives. Sarah Morrison, her real name we discovered, had been at this for 15 years. 7 husbands across the country, all dead within 2 years of marriage, all leaving grieving widows who'd been too heartbroken to investigate further. I attended every day of her arraignment, sitting in the front row where she could see me. Gone was the confused elderly woman she'd tried to destroy. In my place sat Lizzie Coleman, widow survivor and star witness. Sarah tried everything. She claimed Mark had masterminded it all, that she was just a pawn. When that didn't work, she insisted I'd entrapped her, that the confession was coerced. Her lawyer, a slick man in an expensive suit, argued diminished capacity, temporary insanity, even self-defense. None of it stuck. The cameras had captured everything. Her detailed confession naming victims and methods was devastating. But the real nail in her coffin came from an unexpected source. Dr. Garrett, facing life in prison, flipped completely. In exchange for a reduced sentence, he provided records going back a decade. Patient files, payment records, even recordings of Sarah discussing projects with him. He'd kept it all as insurance, paranoid that she'd eventually turn on him too. "She's a monster," he told the court, sweating through his cheap suit. She'd researched these men for months, choosing ones with health conditions that could mask morphine poisoning. Then she'd create a medical history using my credentials to make it look like they'd been declining for years. By the time they died, the paper trail showed a natural progression. The prosecutor asked him about Robert specifically. I gripped the bench, needing to hear, but dreading the details. "She started dosing him 6 months before his death," Garrett admitted. "Small amounts in his evening tea, just enough to weaken his heart gradually. She kept journals documenting his decline to support the eventual death certificate. She was very thorough." "And Mrs. Coleman, what was the plan for her?" Garrett glanced at me, shame flickering across his face. "Faster. Sarah was getting impatient, and Mark Coleman owed dangerous people money. The plan was to increase the morphine dramatically, induce confusion and physical weakness, then have her committed. Once in Sunset Gardens, she would have died within weeks. Another tragic case of an elderly woman failing after losing her husband." "You've done this before with Sarah Morrison." 6 times, he whispered. "Phoenix, Vegas, Dallas, Chicago, Miami, and here. I'm not proud of it. But she paid well, and I had my own debts." The courtroom erupted. Family members of other victims were present, and their cries of anger and grief filled the air. I sat quietly, letting their pain wash over me. We were a horrible sisterhood, bound by Sarah's greed and our loved one's blood. Mark's testimony came later, and it was perhaps the hardest to bear. My son reduced to a broken man in an orange jumpsuit, his shoulder still bandaged from Sarah's bullet. He didn't try to minimize his role. Under oath, he confessed to everything. The gambling debts that had spiraled out of control. The loan sharks who'd threatened to break his legs, then kill him. The desperate internet search that had led him to articles about Sarah's previous husbands. "I thought I was being clever," he said, not meeting my eyes. "I found her in Vegas working at a casino. I knew what she did. I thought I could control it, use her skills just once to solve my problems." "But she took over," the prosecutor prompted. "Completely. She said my father was too sharp, too careful. He'd notice if anything changed suddenly, so she started the tea ritual, insisting it would help his heart. Small doses, she promised, just enough to weaken him. I convinced myself it was merciful. He had a bad heart anyway." "And your mother?" Mark finally looked at me, tears streaming down his face. "I never wanted to hurt her. Sarah said we just needed her confused enough to sign papers. Once we had the money, I planned to take care of her properly. A nice facility, the best care. I told myself it was for her own good." "But you knew Sarah had killed before." "I blocked it out," Mark admitted. I told myself Mom was different. She was my mother. Sarah wouldn't. But deep down, I knew. I just needed the money so badly, and Sarah made it sound so easy, so harmless. Is that why you helped your mother in the workshop? You attacked Sarah Morrison? When she pointed the gun at Mom, something snapped. All the lies I'd told myself crumbled. I realized I was about to watch my mother murdered, and it would be entirely my fault. I couldn't let that happen. It wasn't redemption, not even close. But it was truth, and that counted for something. Sarah's past unraveled like a poison thread. Real name Sarah Jane Mitchell, born in Detroit to a mother who'd run confidence games and a father who'd died in prison. She'd learned early that men were marks, love was weakness, and money was the only truth worth knowing. Her first husband in Chicago had been practiced a lonely widower with a modest insurance policy. By the time she reached Robert, she was a master of her craft. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. Patricia Williams testified via video link, too fragile to travel, but determined to see justice done. She told the court about her son Tom, a brilliant surgeon who just wanted someone to love him. Sarah destroyed him slowly, Patricia said, her voice steady despite her tears. Not just with poison, but with lies. She convinced him his family didn't love him, that only she cared. By the time he died, he'd changed his will to leave her everything, cutting out his own children. She didn't just steal his money. She stole his love, his trust, his life. Other families came forward. Jeffrey's sister from Chicago, Martin's daughter from Dallas. Each story a variation on the same theme: a lonely man, a devoted younger wife, a gradual decline, a tragic death, a grieving widow who disappeared with everything. The trial lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of testimony, evidence, and revelations. Sarah maintained her innocence throughout, occasionally shooting me venomous looks that promised retribution if she ever got free. She never would. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon, guilty on all counts. Murder in the first degree ×7, attempted murder ×2, fraud, elder abuse conspiracy, and a dozen other charges. As the judge read the verdicts, I watched Sarah's face. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw fear. Real, bone-deep terror as she realized she'd spend the rest of her life in prison. Life without the possibility of parole, the judge intoned, to be served consecutively for each murder conviction. 7 life sentences. She'd die in prison, old and alone, with no one to bring her poisoned tea. Mark received 25 years. It could have been worse, but his cooperation and his last-minute attack on Sarah had earned him some mercy. He'd be in his 60s when he got out, his life effectively over. As they led him away, he looked back at me one last time. "I love you, Mom," he said quietly. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Love wasn't enough to wash away betrayal. Maybe someday I'd find forgiveness, but that day wasn't today. Dr. Garrett got 20 years with the possibility of parole in 12. His medical license was permanently revoked, his reputation destroyed. He'd traded his oath to do no harm for money, and now he'd pay the price. Outside the courthouse, the media waited like hungry wolves. I stood on the steps, Patricia Williams on one side, Paul on the other, as reporters shouted questions. I'd prepared a statement, but when the moment came, I spoke from the heart instead. "My husband Robert was murdered for money," I said, my voice carrying across the crowd. "Killed by our own son and a woman who made a career of destroying families. But they failed to destroy me. They failed to steal our legacy. Today, justice was served not just for Robert, but for all the husbands, all the families torn apart by greed." "Mrs. Coleman," one reporter called out, "how do you feel about your son's sentence?" I thought carefully before answering. Mark made his choices. He chose money over morality, a con artist over his family.
He'll have 25 years to think about those choices. I hope he uses that time to become the man his father tried to raise, not the monster he became. Will you ever forgive him? Forgiveness isn't mine to give, I said quietly. That's between Mark and his father's memory. I'm focused on honoring Robert's legacy and helping other families avoid our tragedy. As we walked away from the courthouse, Patricia took my arm. You did it, Lizzie. You got justice for all of them. We did it, I corrected, together. That night I sat in Robert's study for the last time. I was selling the house too many poisoned memories within its walls. Tomorrow I'd start packing, preparing for a new life in a new place. But tonight, I allowed myself to grieve. Not just for Robert, but for the son I'd lost to greed, the family destroyed by betrayal, the years stolen by a woman who saw love as weakness. I pulled out Robert's letter one final time, reading his words of warning and love. He'd tried to protect me even as he faced his own danger. That was the man I'd married, the one who'd loved me for 45 years. I kept my promise, my darling, I whispered to his photo. They're paying for what they did. Sarah will die in prison. Mark will serve his time and your story will save others. It's not the ending we planned, but it's justice. I thought about the Robert Foundation I was establishing with the estate money. It would help elderly people recognize and escape financial abuse, provide legal resources for families suspicious of sudden deaths, and work to change laws around elder care oversight. Robert's death would mean something. All their deaths would mean something. As midnight approached, I closed the study door for the last time. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new beginnings. But tonight, I'd won. The widow they'd tried to destroy had brought down a serial killer, exposed a conspiracy, and found justice for the man she loved. Not bad for a confused old lady. In the distance, sirens wailed through the night, carrying someone else's emergency, someone else's tragedy. But for once, they weren't coming for me. I was safe, I was free, and I was ready to live whatever years remained on my own terms. Sarah had been right about one thing: everything I loved had died, but she'd been wrong about something crucial. Love itself hadn't died. It had evolved, transformed from soft sentiment into steel resolve. The love that had made me vulnerable had also made me strong. And that love, Robert's love, my love, had won. 6 months after the trial, I stood on the deck of my new beach house in Santa Barbara, watching the sun paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. The sound of waves had replaced the sirens of my old neighborhood, and salt air had washed away the lingering scent of poisoned tea. The house was smaller than the one Robert and I had shared, but it was mine. Every corner reflected my choices, my tastes, my new life. No ghosts haunted these rooms, no memories of betrayal stained the walls. On the mantel sat a photo of Robert from our 40th anniversary, his smile as warm as the day I'd met him. Beside it stood a smaller frame holding a picture of Mark at age 5, grinning toothlessly at the camera. I could honor who they'd been without forgiving who they'd become. The doorbell chimed, and I welcomed my guests for our weekly gathering. Patricia Williams arrived first, followed by June Carlson from Dallas, Maria Santos from Miami, and Ellen Chang from Phoenix. We were an unlikely group bound by our shared tragedy and determination to prevent others from suffering the same fate. Ladies, I said, pouring wine as we settled in the living room. I have news. The Robert Foundation received approval for our first 3 cases today. Patricia raised her glass. To small victories and saved lives. We toasted, then got down to business. Each woman had become an expert in different aspects of elder abuse. Patricia handled legal referrals. June worked with law enforcement training. Maria focused on medical oversight, and Ellen managed our growing database of suspicious deaths. I've identified 17 similar cases in the last 5 years, Ellen reported, adjusting her reading glasses.
all involving younger spouses, mysterious illnesses, and quick cremations. I forwarded the information to Paul's new task force. My nephew had received a promotion after the Sarah Morrison case, now heading a unit dedicated to elder abuse and suspicious deaths. He called weekly our family bond stronger than ever. There's also this, Maria added, sliding a letter across the coffee table. From a woman in Oregon. Her mother's caregiver has started bringing her special tea every evening. I read quickly, recognizing the pattern. Patricia, can you connect her with a lawyer? Ellen, let's get this into the database. I'll call Paul tonight. This was our mission, now our purpose. We couldn't bring back our loved ones, but we could save others. The Robert Foundation had already helped 3 families escape suspicious caregivers and had consulted on 5 investigations. After the meeting, Patricia lingered as the others left. We'd become close friends, our shared loss creating an unexpected bond. How are you really doing, Lizzie? She asked, settling back with her wine. I considered the question. Better than I expected. The nightmares have mostly stopped. I can drink tea again, though I still prefer coffee, and I'm learning to live with the anger. The anger never fully goes away, Patricia said softly, but it transforms, becomes fuel for purpose rather than poison in your veins. Have you heard from Mark? She asked carefully. He writes every week, I admitted. I don't open the letters yet. They go in a box in the closet. Maybe someday I'll be ready to read them, but not now. That's fair. Forgiveness can't be rushed. If it comes at all, I added. Some betrayals cut too deep for healing. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. These quiet moments were precious, hard-won peace after months of turmoil. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. James Morrison, Robert's lawyer and old friend, arrived with a box I didn't recognize. Lizzie, I've been going through Robert's files, closing out some old matters, and I found this. It was in a safety deposit box I didn't know about, with instructions to give it to you 1 year after his death. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, all in Robert's handwriting. The top one was addressed to me. My dearest Lizzie, it began. If you're reading this, then a year has passed since I left you. I hope by now the sharpest edge of grief has dulled, and you're finding your way forward. I sank into a chair, tears already flowing as I read on. There are things I never told you, my darling. Not out of distrust, but out of love. I knew about Mark's debts long before my death. I knew he was desperate, possibly dangerous. I'd already changed my will to protect you, but I feared it wouldn't be enough. So, I made other arrangements. The enclosed letters are to be opened 1 each month, a final year of conversations between us. Think of them as my voice reaching through the veil, reminding you that love transcends death and that you were always stronger than you knew. If Mark has disappointed you, if he's made terrible choices, please remember that it isn't your fault. We gave him love, values, opportunity. What he did with those gifts was his choice alone. Don't carry guilt that isn't yours. Live, my darling. Travel to those places we always talked about. Make new friends. Find new purposes. Don't let my death or anyone's betrayal rob you of the joy you deserve. You have so much life left to live. Live it fully. All my love, always and forever. I clutched the letter to my chest, Robert's final gift warming my heart. Even in death, he was protecting me, loving me, encouraging me forward. Trust him to find a way to comfort me from beyond the grave. Over the following months, I opened 1 letter each month, savoring Robert's words like fine wine. He wrote about our memories, shared stories I'd never heard, revealed dreams he'd had for our future, and always reminded me of my strength. The foundation grew, helping dozens of families. We partnered with hospitals to train staff on recognizing elder abuse. We worked with legislators to strengthen laws around financial exploitation. We created a network of safe houses for elderly people escaping dangerous situations.
1 year after the trial, I received notice that Sarah had been attacked in prison by another inmate whose grandmother had died under suspicious circumstances. She survived but would spend months recovering. I felt no satisfaction in her suffering, only a weary recognition that violence bred violence even behind bars. Dr. Garrett wrote from prison asking for forgiveness. I sent back a single line. Forgiveness must be earned through action, not words. He never wrote again. And Mark, my son, sent a letter every week without fail. After 18 months, I finally opened one. Dear Mom, it read, I don't expect you to read this, but I need to write it. Every day I wake up in this cell and remember what I've done. Not just to you, but to Dad. I killed my father. I tried to kill my mother. No amount of time served will erase that. I think about him constantly. Remember teaching me to ride a bike? He ran beside me for hours, never letting go until I was ready. He taught me about integrity, hard work, loyalty. Every lesson he gave, I betrayed. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I only want you to know that I'm using this time to become someone Dad wouldn't be ashamed of. I'm teaching literacy to other inmates working in the prison library, attending every counseling session available. I'm clean now. No gambling, no schemes, no lies. It took losing everything to understand what I had thrown away. If I could take it back, I would give my life for one more day with Dad, one more chance to be the son he deserved. I love you, Mom. That's the only true thing left in me. Your son, if I can still call myself that. I set the letter aside, my emotions too complex to process. There was pain there and rage, and underneath it all, a whisper of the love I'd once felt for my baby boy. Not forgiveness, not yet, maybe not ever, but acknowledgement. He was trying to change. Whether it would be enough remained to be seen. 3 years passed. The foundation helped over 100 families. Patricia and I traveled to Europe, finally taking that trip Robert and I had always postponed. We stood in the Louvre, sailed the Mediterranean, and toasted our late husbands from the top of the Eiffel Tower. They would have loved this, Patricia said one evening as we dined in Rome. They would have. I agreed. But they also would be proud that we're doing it without them, that we didn't stop living when they died. On the 4th anniversary of Robert's death, I visited his grave for the first time since the funeral. I'd needed distance from the pain, but now I could face it. His headstone was simple, elegant, just as he'd have wanted. Hello, my love, I said, arranging fresh roses. I've been busy. The foundation helped save a woman in Arkansas last week. Her son was slowly poisoning her for her life insurance. Sound familiar, but we caught it in time. She's safe now, living with her daughter in Maine. I told him about the travels, the friends, the work. About Mark's letters, which I now read though didn't answer. About the life I'd built from the ashes of our tragedy. I miss you every day, I concluded. But I'm okay. More than okay. I'm living just as you asked. And I'm making sure your death meant something. Every life we save carries a piece of your spirit forward. The wind rustled through the trees, and for a moment I could almost hear Robert's voice, feel his presence. Love transcended death just as he'd written. What Sarah had tried to destroy lived on, transformed but unbroken. As I walked back to my car, my phone rang. Paul's voice was urgent. Aunt Lizzie, we've got a situation in San Diego. An elderly man, suspicious caregiver, family concerned. Can you come? On my way, I said, already mentally preparing for the investigation. This was my life now. Part guardian angel, part avenging fury, all survivor. Sarah had created a warrior when she'd tried to destroy a widow. Robert's death had birthed a protector of the vulnerable. Every predator we stopped, every family we saved was another victory against the darkness that had tried to claim me. I was 68 when Robert died.
At 72, I was stronger than I'd ever been, surrounded by purpose and chosen family. The sun set over the cemetery as I drove away, painting the sky in shades of hope and remembrance. Somewhere, Sarah rotted in a cell. Mark struggled toward redemption, and I lived on, carrying Robert's love and transforming grief into grace. "Thank you, my darling," I whispered to the photograph on my dashboard, "for loving me, for warning me, for making me strong enough to survive and thrive." Until we meet again. The road stretched ahead, full of possibilities and purpose. I pressed the accelerator, eager to reach San Diego to help another family, to honor Robert's memory through action. This wasn't the golden years we'd planned, but it was perhaps something even more precious, a life of meaning born from loss, strength forged from betrayal, and love that even death couldn't destroy. I was Lizzie Coleman, widow survivor, protector, and warrior, and my story was far from over. As I share this story with you today, I want you to know that you're never too old to fight back, never too grief-stricken to see clearly, and never too alone to find help. If someone you love is isolated, confused, or suddenly declining, ask questions. If caregivers seem too eager, too controlling, too interested in finances, investigate. Trust your instincts. But most importantly, remember this: love isn't weakness. The bonds that make us vulnerable also make us strong. The grief that breaks us can also remake us into something stronger. And sometimes the best revenge against those who would destroy us is simply to survive, thrive, and help others do the same. Robert used to say that every ending was also a beginning. He was right. My ending as a naive widow became my beginning as a protector. My son's betrayal became my purpose. Sarah's poison became my power. So I ask you, have you ever faced a betrayal that transformed you? Have you found strength in your darkest moments? How do we protect our vulnerable loved ones while honoring their independence? Share your thoughts below, because your story might be the warning or encouragement someone else needs to hear. If this story touched you, please like and subscribe to hear more stories of survival and triumph. Share it with others who might need to hear that they're not alone, that justice is possible, and that sometimes the best revenge is a life well lived. Thank you for joining me on this journey from victim to victor. Remember, you are stronger than you know, and love multiplied through action can overcome any evil. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay strong, and always trust your instincts. They might just save your life,